The Strange Public Benefactor. In the dusty shop of Dan, the second-hand man, there was no sound except the whir of a rickety sewing machine in the back room. Dan bought old clothes which he mended and pressed and sold again to people who could not afford new ones. Usually he spent every evening in his dim little Boston shop, but tonight Dan's niece was to be married, and the old clothes man was hurriedly stitching up a rent in a dress suit he had bought that very morning from a dusky gentleman in Grant Street. It was worn and shabby, but surveying himself in the cracked mirror a few moments later, Danny felt he would look quite as fine as the groom. Well pleased with his appearance, he nodded to his reflection and, taking down a second-hand high hat from his shelf, let himself out into the night. It was a warm, starry evening in May, and, coming to the end of the narrow street in which he lived, Dan struck out across a small park, whistling softly to himself. He would have preferred his pipe, but in honor of the grand occasion had purchased a handful of 5-cent cigars. Placing one between his teeth, he fumbled in his pocket for the box of matches he had surely placed there before starting. His fingers closed instead on a small leather book. "What's this?" exclaimed Danny in surprise, and, stepping under a park lamp, he began fluttering over the pages. It was filled with closely written paragraphs in a strangely cramped hand. The words were no words Danny had ever heard or seen. To prove it, he settled his specs more firmly and read a whole paragraph aloud, moistening his lips between the long hard sentences, and keeping his cigar in place in his mouth with great difficulty. "Well, did anyone ever hear the like of that?" chuckled Danny, winking up at the statue of a public benefactor who stood facing him in a small plot of grass. "What do you think of it yourself, old felly?" "I hardly know," murmured the public benefactor, letting the arm which had been stiffly extended fall heavily at his side. "I hardly know. You see, I've never thought before, and—" Merciful mackerel! The cigar fell from Danny's lips, the high hat from his head, and hurling the leather book into a clump of bushes, he turned and fled for his life, bumping into trees and benches and running in the opposite direction from the wedding. In fact, I am not sure he ever did get to the wedding at all. The public benefactor watched him go with round, unwinking eyes, then stepping down from his pedestal, picked up the high hat, fortunately an extremely large one, and placed it gravely upon his head. "Now for an umbrella," murmured the stone gentleman determinedly. "I must have an umbrella. What I've suffered all these years, rain and snow. Ah, h. Catching sight of an old lady hurrying down one of the cinder paths, he called loudly, "Stop! Stop! Give me that umbrella!" For some seconds the old lady, who was quite deaf, paid no attention, but when, looking over her shoulder, she saw a grey stone gentleman in a frock coat pounding after her, waving both arms, she picked up her skirts, jumped over a little hedge, and fell face down among the pansies. Without feeling at all sorry, or stopping to help her to her feet, the public benefactor took the umbrella from her hand. Opening it with a little grunt of satisfaction and holding it over his head as he had seen other people do, he stepped carelessly over the old lady and continued down the cinder path. "I've always wanted to be like other people," mused the statue, striding along contentedly, "and now, I am. But I wonder why I never did this before." Why indeed? Simply because he had never been alive before. The words in the little black book must have held some strange and mysterious force. The owner of Danny's dress suit must have been a powerful magician to bring this cold statue to life. And as he strode across the little Boston park, with Danny's hat upon his head and the old lady's umbrella clasped tightly in his hand, little boys who had come for a quiet game of marbles before bedtime, men and women on their way home to tea, stared in perfect astonishment and then took to their heels, screaming hoarsely as they ran. "I'm acting just the way they are acting, and yet they run away," grumbled the public benefactor crossly. "What's the matter with them anyway?" He sank down on a park bench to puzzle it all out, but the bench, which had been built to hold only ordinary folk, crumpled like a match under his great weight. A tramp who had been asleep on the other end, wakened by the terrible tumble, took one glance at the stone man, then rolled into a clump of shrubbery where he lay trembling so violently leaves fell in showers to the walk. By the time the public benefactor had struggled to his feet, a great crowd had gathered. At a safe distance they peered at him, waving their arms, shaking their heads and looking so frightened the public benefactor began to feel frightened himself. Turning his back upon them, he walked out of the park and straight into the middle of a busy crossing. Here he stopped to gaze at a winking electric sign when a dreadful thump almost knocked the umbrella from his hand, and a series of shouts almost raised the hat from his head. A motor truck going at a fast clip had run right into him. But instead of upsetting the stone man, the truck splintered to bits and lay scattered about the street like a broken toy. Surely a pleasant change from breaking up poor pedestrians. But the truck driver did not seem to think so. Separating himself from the wreckage, he advanced threateningly upon the public benefactor. But one good look at that calm stone figure seemed to be enough. A mounted policeman leaning down seized the high-hatted gentleman by the arm, then feeling the hard stone beneath his fingers he reined back his horse and blew a shrill blast on his whistle. In less than a minute the street was a seething mass of men, women, little girls and boys, all striving for a glimpse of the man who had stopped a truck. Next someone turned in a fire alarm and the fire engines came clanging on the scene. The firemen, not knowing what else to do, turned their hose full upon the offending statue. Alarmed and disgusted, and protecting himself as well as he could with the old lady's umbrella, the public benefactor decided to return to his pedestal. But in the excitement he took a wrong turning. Then he began to run and the crowd to run after him, faster and faster and faster. His stone feet, thudding upon the asphalt, shook the houses on both sides and, dodging as best he could the sticks, stones and other missiles of his pursuers, the poor bewildered statue ran on. Being very large and perfectly tireless, he soon outdistanced them and, looking over his shoulder to make sure, failed to notice the steep embankment ahead, till it was too late. The workmen themselves had not intended to blow such a terrific hole in the earth. A thin crust of earth at the bottom hid the yawning cavity from view. But the stone man, tumbling head over heels down the steep sides, crashed through this crust as if it had been paper and plunged into a damp darkness. "What now?" groaned the statue dismally, clutching his umbrella. "Am I a bird? Why, oh why did I ever leave my pedestal?" But wishing made no difference at all and down he dropped to the very bottom of nowhere. Then all at once he crashed through a crust of blue sky out into the blazing sunlight and thumped down in the middle of a broad green field. Luckily he landed upon his feet, but so hard and so heavily that he went down to his knees in soft earth. For a few moments he stood perfectly still. Then, closing his umbrella, he pulled one leg and then the other out of the mud and took a few steps to shake the stuff from his stone shins. It was night and now it is day. I was there and now I am here. What next? He muttered uneasily. The country into which he had fallen so suddenly seemed safe enough. Green fields, dotted with feathery trees, stretched to the right and left. But after the dusty Boston park it seemed large and lonely. As he gazed about uncertainly, he noticed a blue figure, walking briskly along a yellow highway that ran through the center of the fields. He had never in his whole carved career seen a fellow like this, and as the figure drew nearer he grasped his umbrella firmly and made ready to fight or run. It was a scarecrow, a live, jolly, sure enough straw-stuffed scarecrow. As he came opposite he took off his hat. "Good afternight," said the scarecrow politely. The public benefactor made an unsuccessful effort to remove his own hat, but he had jammed it down too hard. "I suppose you mean good morning," he remarked stiffly, returning the scarecrow's bow. "Have it your own way," smiled the scarecrow, with a carefree wave. "And speaking of ways, where are you going?" "I'm not going, I'm coming," announced the public benefactor sulkily. The experiences of the past few hours had made him suspicious of every place and everybody. The Scarecrow considered his answer for a few seconds in silence, then stepping closer inquired earnestly, "Tell me, are you a person?" "Are you?" At this quick and unexpected turning of his question, the Scarecrow threw back his head and laughed heartily. "I don't know," he admitted merrily, "whether I'm a person or not, but I do know that I'm alive and it's great fun to be alive." "Is it?" The public benefactor looked dubiously into the Scarecrow's cheerful cotton countenance. "I'm not sure I like it," he sighed, shaking his head ponderously. "Oh, you'll get used to it." Clapping on his hat, the straw man regarded his companion attentively. "You're the only live statue I've ever seen," he observed at last. "How do you happen to be alive?" There was something so jolly about this queer fellow, the poor statue began to feel a little happier. "First," he began slowly, "I was quarried, then I was hacked and hewn into my present shape. For many years I stood on a pedestal in a little park in the city of Boston. While I could neither move nor talk, I could see and hear all that went on about me. And what I saw and heard was interesting enough. I watched the children sail their boats in the small pond, listened to the band on warm summer evenings, and observed the strange habits of the men and women who walked about under the trees. If I had just had a hat or umbrella to protect me from the rain and snow, I could have been perfectly happy." "You must be perfectly happy now," put in the Scarecrow slyly, "for I see you have both." The public benefactor shook his head impatiently at the interruption. "Once a year," he continued pompously, "a crowd of citizens came and hung wreaths around my neck, and in long tedious speeches which I could not understand referred to me as a great public benefactor." "Do you know what a public benefactor is?" he inquired curiously. "Well," answered the Scarecrow cautiously, "you probably founded a school or a library or gave large sums of money to the poor. What was your name anyway?" "I never knew," replied the gray stone gentleman sadly. "It was carved on the base of my pedestal, and as I was unable to bend over, I could never discover this interesting information." "Then I shall call you Benny," decided the Scarecrow cheerfully, "short for public benefactor, you know. Do you look like the person you're supposed to be?" The statue shook his head. "I don't know that either," he admitted gloomily. "Oh, never mind that," said the Scarecrow, sitting down on a nearby tree stump. "You are a speaking likeness of somebody, but how did you come to life?" "I was coming to that," exclaimed Benny quickly, and in short excited sentences he told how an old Irishman in evening clothes had stopped under the park lamp and read some strange words from a little black book, and how he immediately felt a desire to step down from his pedestal. "So I did," he went on mournfully, and proceeded to relate his terrifying experiences and his final fall into this strange land. "It is very queer," he finished in a depressed voice. "When I was uninteresting in Unalive, people treated me with respect and hung wreaths around my neck, yet when I came to life they turned a hose on me and even hit me with bricks." The Scarecrow shook his head. "There's no accounting for mortals," he explained solemnly, "but now that you are in the fairy kingdom of Oz, things will be different. Anybody can be alive here, and no questions asked. They even let me live," he concluded gaily. "Is it a republic?" asked Benny, eyeing the Scarecrow with new interest. "Indeed not," exclaimed the straw man loftily. "We are a magic monarchy under the beneficent rule of a little fairy, and there," he waved proudly to the left, "lies the capital. If you wish, I will take you to the Emerald City at once and present you to the Queen. What would you like to be now that you are alive?" he asked curiously. "Well," said Benny after a moment's thought, "I should like to be a real person." "Do you think I could ever be a real person, Scarecrow?" The Scarecrow took off his hat and pulled several wisps of straw from his head. "I don't see why not," he decided brightly. The way to be a real person is to act like a real person. Just begin acting like a real person, Benny, my boy, and first thing you know you'll be one. Is that what you did? Benny looked doubtfully at this strange citizen of Oz. The Scarecrow nodded modestly and, taking the Stone Man's elbow, started down the yellow brick highway. Look alive now, he chuckled merrily, for you are to meet a queen. It's hard for a stone man to look alive, but I'll do the best I can, sighed the public benefactor in a resigned voice. How do you happen to be alive yourself? He inquired heavily. That, said the Scarecrow airily, that is a long story, you see. I see a great ugly bird, interrupted the public benefactor, waving his umbrella wildly. Let's run, I never did like birds. They perch on my head. Pray do not concern yourself, begged his companion earnestly, and try to act like a real person, can't you? Withdrawing his arm from Benny's, the Scarecrow took off his hat and blinked upward. Well, queried Benny nervously, what would a real person do now? He would run, choked the Scarecrow in a hoarse whisper. Run, you son of a boulder, run.